So today we are going to look at the design considerations for handheld spectrum analyzer. This was a part of a presentation that I gave before, and I just thought that it'll be great if I could share my knowledge because there's limited amount of information available which is quite basic. So if you ideally go through the various sources, like even if you Google something related to spectrum analyzer, you are like getting data sheets and stuff of that sort. But I wanted something very specific, like what would you consider when you would go for a handheld spectrum analyzer? Not much in detail, but overall, and a good overview before you begin getting into the details. So that's the reason why I decided to go with this presentation. So let's begin. So now, first of all, we'll take into account the basic design considerations. So now if you're thinking about a handheld device, obviously it has to be something small in size and obviously light in weight so that you can hold it in your hand. And as we're talking about operation in the field, it should be able to withstand the rigors of outdoor. So therefore it must have a robust body as well. And all of this with a battery operation, because you will not be able to plug it anywhere or something like that when you're on field. So you obviously need a battery operated device, and with a long battery hours and low power consumption obviously, and all of this at low cost, because if we really want to increase the cost, then we will go for benchtop devices and not the handheld one. So obviously we wouldn't want to exceed the cost. And if you're talking about low power consumption and battery operation, then if you're really looking for something like 8 hours of battery or something like that, then you should go for superheat turbine kind of architecture, because FFT architecture will consume a lot of battery, and it also gives you like really fast result as well. But if you want something like 8 hours or so, then super heterodyne receiver is the one that you should go for. Now, next up are the performance based key design considerations. So I haven't considered all of the things, like I haven't considered here the video bandwidth and stuff like that, but the very basic ones like the frequency range, resolution, sweep time, sensitivity and noise, and dynamic range. These are the few that I've covered in under this section. And now these are like related to performance, and performance of the device is crucial, right? Apart from just the outer design and stuff like that, we also need to know how it'll perform in the end. That is the defining factor. So that's the reason why I've covered a few of them. So let's go ahead and see each of them one by one. First up is frequency range. Now, when we talk about frequency range, that's the main thing that the spectrum analyzer is supposed to do, right? It is going to display you frequency and the power that it holds. So it's all about frequency at the end of the day. So what is there on the x-axis? So the range of that. So how much range is being covered, and for what range will it operate, basically the frequency range. So we would want something which would cover the fundamental frequency as well as some of the harmonics and the spurious signals on the high end side, and obviously the intermediate frequency on the lower end side. So we would want to cover such a range of frequencies. And if we are thinking about a wide range of frequency, then we must go for super heterodyne, because it offers a really wide bandwidth. It can sweep through like really um, good amount of frequency range, and it also starts from something like 0 hertz. So that's very beneficial if we want to go for a wide frequency range, and especially starting with 0. So that's going to help us if we go for super heterodyne architecture. So next up is resolution. Now, resolution is a very basic thing, right? We talk about any device resolution is of importance. So, what exactly is that? So, in this case, it's the ability to resolve signals of equal amplitude. So, we have like two closely spaced frequencies, and we need to know the amplitude. So, if it's like equal in amplitude, we don't want it to like get obscured. Like if you can see here, when the resolution bandwidth is around 100 kilohertz, at that time, it's too wide. The band of the IF filter is too wide, and that's the reason why we are unable to see two signals out there, or probably three signals out there actually, and we aren't able to see because the entire shape of the filter is coming into picture out here. So when the resolution bandwidth is quite wide, this is the problem. You cannot see the other closely spaced equal amplitude signals. That's why if we decrease the bandwidth to, let's say, 10 kilohertz, which is shown in the figure in the middle, then we can actually make out that there are at least three signals out there. And when we go to 100 hertz, we can see the amplitude quite clearly, right? So the more narrower it gets, the better it gets. So resolution, if it is narrow, I mean the resolution bandwidth, if it is narrower, then we are able to see the closely spaced signals very, very nicely. And that brings us to the next slide, which is sweep time. So what exactly is sweep time? So sweep time is nothing but the amount of time it takes for a measurement to get completed, or for the amount of time it takes to sweep through the analyzer, right? So we have to give some amount of time. If you're going for a narrow bandwidth, then you have to give some time to the filter to respond. Otherwise, we can see in the figure, sweeping too fast will cause a drop in the displayed amplitude and shift in frequency, and we do not want that. So we need to allow it some time to respond. Otherwise, if it is like too fast, then you will get absurd values, which we don't want. So a trade-off has to be always made between the resolution bandwidth and sweep time. So we can see that if the bandwidth is reduced, the sweep time must be increased. So there's no other way around. There's one thing to note in the design. We could go for an auto sweep function. So what is that? So it's like auto calibrated sweep function. So whenever you select a particular resolution bandwidth, the sweep time, the minimum sweep time that'll be required for good performance will be selected automatically. So that's a good something to consider in the design, good part to be considered in the design. So that's about sweep time. And yeah. Next up is sensitivity and noise. Now we know that in the end, an engineer would want to measure very, very weak or very low level signals at the end of the day. So we would want to detect those. And for the same reason, we are defining sensitivity now. So it's nothing but the ability of the device to measure low level or very weak signals, right? So we would want the sensitivity to be as high as possible. So what could be the restricting factor for the sensitivity? It would be the thermally generated noise by the electrons, which are moving around, and they are getting amplified by the various stages which are present in the spectrum analyzer. Various gain stages are just amplifying this effect, and what will happen is this noise will start appearing on the screen, and that is what will not make our weak signals visible, right? So the signal might just get lost in the noise, and we wouldn't want that. So but we can't really do anything about this, so that some amount of noise is always going to be there, and that's going to be the restricting factor. So what we could do is we could increase sorry, rather decrease the RF input attenuation if you're talking about super heterodyne structure. So we could do that and make noise less prominent, right? And increase the sensitivity rather. So that's something that we can do, but we cannot do something more about this internally generated noise. So it's always going to be present, and it's the restricting factor. So yeah, that's about the sensitivity and noise. So next up is the dynamic range. Now we've already discussed in the first performance factor about the frequency range. Now this is dynamic range. We're talking about the y-axis. So this is the maximum power ratio between a high power or um, a strong signal and a low power signal, which is like a smaller signal, that are present at the input of the analyzer, at the jack of the analyzer, such that both signals can be discerned. You should be able to resolve and measured at the same time or in the same display. So it's very, very self-explanatory definition. There's nothing more that we could add to this, except for that you should be able to see the highest amplitude as well as the lowest amplitude on the same display, right? So that's about the dynamic range. And internally generated noise and distortion affect the accuracy, right? Up next is user and data interface design consideration. So we've discussed all of the types of design considerations, starting from the very basic one to the key ones, and now we are heading, I mean, the performance one, and now we're heading towards the user and data interface, because in the end, it's all about the user, right? So the end user who's going to use it should be able to operate with it with quite ease. So the first thing that we would require is something like computer interface. So I would want to connect it with the USB to my computer and would like to transfer some data which I've captured, the log or whatever, and I would like to see it in a more advanced manner. So I need advanced functionality in the software that will be offered by the company who's also offering me the handheld spectrum analyzer. So that is something we would obviously require. So that's about the computer interface, and obviously advanced functionalities can be provided in the software, and um, some other operations should be made possible which you cannot actually do on the device on the field. And touchscreen capability, so we take it for granted nowadays because all the devices need to have touchscreen. So we're not talking about capacitive ones nowadays, it's all about TFT. We need it to be very, very responsive. It makes a big, big difference. And obviously sometimes you also need hard keys or buttons to operate, and with a click of button you should be able to change the settings and things like that. So it's quite available nowadays on many devices, and it's also something that we need to consider when designing. And also we have something called as markers with readout of absolute and difference values. So that's for the amplitude. So you should be able to see the difference between two amplitudes and the absolute values. And other thing is we do not want it to take a lot of time. So we want quick outcome, faster speed, zero warm-up time, something like that. So it should be able to start instantaneously. So um, we want faster speed. And then obviously if you're operating on field, you will be operating during the daytime as well. So for that you need anti-glare functionality, or the solution. So the sunlight shouldn't interfere when you're operating your device. So that's about it. And I will also like to add that if you're thinking about speed and you don't want to miss out on the transient responses and stuff like that, then you should definitely go for FFT based architecture. But if you don't want to do that and you want to go for a cheaper option, a little cheaper, then obviously it's heterodyne. Super heterodyne is a little cheaper than that, and it can sweep through like a wide range of frequencies. But FFT is very useful if you want to go for transient and non-repetitive signal analysis. So it's very, very good for that. Also you can measure the phase as well with some amount of calculation. You should be able to see the phase as well, which is not possible with the super heterodyne. And what else? Yeah, the FFT, there's also one limiting factor, which is like the ADC which is used, so that will basically determine the frequency at which the quantization rather is done. So it also affects the uh, amount at which you can take the samples. So that is one thing, and I think that's about it. So these are the things which would affect, or rather I would say these are the things that you need to consider for the design. So So these are the references, and you can see that there is something called as radar tutorial. Do go through that site if you really want to know about the differences between the FFT based architecture and the super heterodyne. It's a very good site. You will get the basics at least before you get into the details and stuff like that. Then obviously, if you really want to get into immense amount of details, then Keysight has a very good PDF for that, so you can always refer that. And I also found something about FFT, that's the Think SRS, which is the second last link. So you can also go through that if you want to read more about the FFT based spectrum analyzer, how it is done and stuff of that sort. And there is electronic design as well. It has got like really nice spectrum analyzer introduction, so you can also go through that. And the first site is about of the one of the uh, company that is operating in that area, that is Thanda. And yeah, that's about it. So do check out, and I am going to put all of these sites in the description box below, so do check it. And if you have any constructive feedback to give, then please do so. It might be that there are some points that you might think of differently, and you think that I'm not covered it properly or whatever. If you think, if it's constructive feedback, it'll help me to improve in future, then please do not be afraid to comment in the comment section below. And thanks a lot.